recovered survey pics did not present a single consistent landscape. One sequence showed a horizon folding upward like paper under heat. Another recorded a plain of dark stone interrupted by structures that appeared, vanished, and returned in altered positions between frames. Audio logs from attached field teams were worse. Bearings shifted without movement. Atmospheric readings contradicted one another within the same minute. Personnel who survived long enough to file statements described distance as unreliable, time as irregular, and the local sky as a condition rather than a stable feature. In several archives, the first indication that a world had crossed beyond ordinary classification was not visual confirmation at all, but the collapse of all predictive models used to describe terrain, orbit, and causality. Such records do not describe a natural category of planet. They describe worlds that have ceased to obey the ordinary contract between matter, motion, and law. In imperial and heretical records alike, they are understood as planets taken so deeply by the warp that physical reality has become subordinate to will, emotion, and demonic influence. The subject of these investigations is Daemon Worlds. A Daemon world is not simply a hostile planet, nor merely a world under the control of chaos worshippers. It is a planetary body transformed by prolonged exposure to the warp until the material universe no longer holds unquestioned authority over it. In some cases, this corruption begins with a persistent warp rift that saturates a system for generations. In others, it follows the catastrophic overlap of realspace and the immaterium on a scale large enough to rewrite the rules governing the surface. Once that threshold is crossed, the world becomes something closer to a fixed island of nightmare, suspended between material existence and the psychic seas beyond it. The most common concentration of such worlds has long been associated with major warp disturbances, especially the Eye of Terror, where entire systems were caught within the ancient rupture that followed the birth of a chaos god. Worlds that had once followed astronomical order were thereafter immersed in an environment where thought and unreality possessed force. Not every world within such regions becomes identical, and this difference is central to understanding them. A Daemon world is not produced by one formula. Its final state depends on the godly power dominating it, the history of its inhabitants, the character of its conquerors, and the emotional residue impressed upon it over long periods of violence, worship, fear, and sacrifice. For this reason, discovery is often retrospective. A world may begin as an ordinary colony, fortress, shrine, mining planet, or marginal settlement. Over time, repeated cult activity, sorcerous ritual, demonic manifestation, or strategic entrapment within a widening warp breach may erode the boundary between realms. Observers do not always realize the scale of change while it is underway. Early signs are often dismissed as local heresy, astropathic interference, weather instability, or mass psychosis. Only later, when evacuation becomes impossible and the surface itself begins to express impossible geometry, hostile sentience, or self-altering conditions, does the truth become unavoidable. The planet has not merely fallen, it has been rewritten. Imperial understanding of these worlds remains partial because direct study is extraordinarily difficult. Even approaching one is hazardous. Navigational data becomes unstable. Auspex returns may contain contradictions or false positives. Atmospheric composition can alter without corresponding chemical cause. Vox traffic may repeat transmissions before they are sent, or play back voices of the dead with convincing fidelity. Landing parties are subject not only to direct assault, but to the gradual loss of judgment. A world of this class does not simply contain danger. It acts upon perception, memory, and desire. Reports from survivors therefore form an uneasy body of evidence, invaluable, incomplete, and often contaminated by trauma or corruption. This uncertainty has shaped the language used around Daemon worlds. They are frequently described as sub-realities, private domains, or impossible realms because conventional planetary terminology becomes insufficient. Surface area may not correspond to orbital readings. Seasons may occur according to ritual cycles rather than stellar mechanics. Day and night may change in response to bloodshed, prayer, or the mood of the ruling power. At the highest levels of corruption, the world itself behaves less like a passive environment and more like an extension of a demonic sovereign. This is why so many demon worlds are associated with demon princes. Once such a being secures dominance, the planet may be remade into a reflection of its patronage, vanity, obsessions, and warfare. The inhabitants of these worlds are as varied as their origins, but broad patterns emerge. First are the demons themselves. On a demon world, their manifestation is less constrained than in ordinary real space. The barrier that would normally resist their sustained presence has already been weakened or functionally abolished. This allows lesser entities, greater entities, and entire hosts aligned to a specific chaos power to exist, maneuver, and wage war with unusual stability. Their presence is not always constant in the same way mortal presence is constant. Some appear in waves, some emerge only under certain psychic conditions, and some are effectively permanent. Even so, the difference is clear. On these worlds, the warp does not merely intrude, it resides. Second are the mortal servants of chaos. These populations may descend from the original inhabitants of the world, from armies stranded by invasion, from pilgrim populations brought under cultic rule, or from generations born entirely within the corrupted environment. Their societies are rarely orderly by imperial standards, but they are not necessarily mindless. Many demon worlds sustain human and post-human populations that labour, breed, raid, worship, and fight under the authority of warbands, priesthoods, sorcerers, Traitor Legion officers, or demonic overlords. Some exist as armed tribes. Some resemble slave populations attached to fortresses, manufactories, or sacrificial economies. Some are little more than prey stocks maintained for ritual and replenishment. Others become dedicated military reservoirs, providing recruits, thralls, porters, ship crews, cult auxiliaries, and offerings to the gods. Third are the transformed. This group includes mutants, possessed hosts, unstable psychers, warp-touched lineages, and creatures so altered by exposure that they no longer fit clean human classification. On a demon world, mutation is not an exceptional event. It becomes a structural feature of life. Hereditary change may accelerate. Deformity may carry status if interpreted as divine favour. In other cases, the malformed are exploited, discarded, or consumed according to the local hierarchy. The result is not a single social pattern, but a brutal ecology of usefulness. What cannot fight may carry ammunition. What cannot carry may serve ritual. What cannot serve may feed something that can. Because these planets exist under competing influences, their populations are seldom stable for long. The four great powers of chaos do not hold all worlds equally, nor forever without contest. Some worlds are clearly marked by one patron and ruled as a coherent domain. Others are battlegrounds where demonic armies and mortal hosts wage wars that can continue for centuries, with no final peace because conflict itself is the point. In such places, inhabitants grow up under conditions where warfare is not an interruption of life, but its organising principle. Children born there may know no neutral sky, no uncontested territory, and no authority not backed by sorcery, terror, or divine favour. Development under such conditions produces cultures adapted to perpetual instability. That development is one of the most important features of the demon world category. A corrupted world does not remain frozen at the moment of its fall. It continues to evolve, though not along natural lines. Settlements expand or collapse according to occult patronage. Language drifts under liturgical pressure. Military structures emerge around access to shrines, portals, relic sites, breeding pits, slave routes, or landing grounds usable by traitor fleets. Entire populations may reorganize around the demands of a ruling prince or legionary force. Where the Iron Warriors hold dominion, one might expect siege economies, labor extraction, and fortress discipline imposed upon corruption. Where the word-bearers dominate, doctrine, ritual, and sacrificial order may define the shape of daily life. Where the Thousand Suns exert power, Hierarchies of knowledge, sorcery, and dependency can determine who survives and who is transfigured. These worlds are chaotic, but not always random. Development can also be measured in the deepening fusion of world and ruler. A newly corrupted planet may still display recognizable geography, political remnants, and infrastructure from its previous state. Over longer spans, those remnants are absorbed into a new order. Former hives become sanctuaries of flesh and brass, or towers of impossible geometry, or plague-ridden capitals whose function is as much ritual as logistical. Roads become processional scars. Defensive walls become living mouths, or labyrinths, or battlements lined with entities that were once human. What began as planetary corruption becomes planetary authorship. The ruling force writes itself onto stone, climate, memory, and bloodline. Examples across chaos-held space demonstrate that this process can produce immense variety. Some demon worlds serve as home domains for demon primarchs and traitor legions, combining military function with symbolic power. Others remain more isolated, acting as private hell realms ruled by lesser princes or greater demons. Some are staging grounds for invasions into real space. Others are prisons, proving grounds, reliquaries, or sites of ceaseless war between rival factions of the same patron power. In all cases, their development reflects a blending of utility and obsession. No demon world exists only to be seen. It exists to serve appetite, ambition, ritual, or war. The original inhabitants of a world, if any survive the transformation, undergo the harshest transition. Their memories of a former order become liabilities. Some are broken and absorbed into cultic structures. Some adapt, learning to read the moods of masters no sane society would acknowledge. Some descend into animal fear or ecstatic devotion. A small number become valuable precisely because they endure without immediate collapse. Such individuals may acquire local authority as interpreters, guides, scribes, scouts, or intermediaries between mortal and demonic power. Survival on a demon world is not proof of purity. More often, it is proof of adaptation under sustained corruption. That fact has made all recovered witnesses deeply suspect, even when their information proves indispensable. It is also necessary to understand that mortal inhabitants are not the only consciousness impressed upon these worlds. The planet itself may retain scars of prior civilizations, psychic echoes of massacres, and recurring manifestations of ancient betrayals. Development therefore unfolds on multiple levels. A settlement changes because its rulers demand it. A population changes because war and mutation force it. The world changes because every act of hatred, worship, despair, and ambition leaves a mark. On a demon world, history does not merely pass. It accumulates as pressure. The ground remembers, structures remember. In extreme cases, even routes of travel and zones of habitation can begin to behave as if shaped by memory rather than matter. This explains why attempts at reconquest are so rare and so often futile. To reclaim such a world would require more than military superiority. It would require the restoration of physical law, psychic sanitation, and social order across a landscape actively resisting all three. Conventional victory conditions become meaningless when fortifications grow back incorrectly, when slain enemies return in altered form, and when the local environment collaborates with the defender. Imperial doctrine has therefore tended toward quarantine, interdiction, and annihilation where possible, though total destruction is not always achievable. A demon world near Imperial space is not simply a hostile objective, it is a permanent strategic infection. Within the archives of chaos itself, however, such worlds are not always viewed as aberrations. They are rewards, laboratories, altars, and kingdoms. A demon prince who wins a world receives more than territory. He receives an instrument through which can become geography. A traitor legion that anchors itself upon such a world gains more than a base. It gains a recruiting ground, a symbolic center, and a realm in which the old limits of flesh, architecture, and time can be bent toward doctrine and war. For their inhabitants, this means that life on a demon world is rarely passive endurance. It is participation in an ecosystem designed to use every body, every fear, and every belief. By the time a world is fully recognized as one of this class, its discovery is already a story of failure. Warnings were missed or ignored or could not be acted upon in time. Populations were left in place too long, cults nested too deeply, warp breach became permanence. The investigators who arrive afterward do not name a new phenomenon so much as acknowledge a completed disaster. They classify what remains, they study fragments, they recover survivors when possible, they compare impossible reports until a pattern emerges. Again and again, the conclusion is the same. These are not merely conquered planets. They are worlds in which conquest has reached the level of reality itself. For that reason, any serious study of Daemon Worlds must begin with their becoming rather than their appearance. They are products of corruption extended over time, of mortal collapse amplified by the warp, and of demonic rule made territorial. Their inhabitants are not incidental residents, but active components in a system of worship, warfare, mutation, and psychic reinforcement. Their development is not civic, biological, or industrial in any ordinary sense. It is devotional, predatory, and transformative. Before one can assess their landscapes, climates, structures, or strategic use, one must first understand this central fact. A Daemon world is a place where a planet stops belonging to nature and begins belonging to chaos. Daemon worlds are planets twisted by chaos and prolonged warp corruption, often within the Eye of Terror. They are commonly ruled by Daemon Princes. Many obey warped physics shaped by demonic will and mortal emotion, and notable examples include domains tied to Traitor Legions and Demon Primarchs. On worlds of this classification, biological systems do not follow stable evolutionary patterns. Flora and fauna exist, but their forms, behaviours, and life cycles are shaped as much by the warp as by any remaining natural processes. What grows upon the surface is rarely passive vegetation in the conventional sense. Growth itself becomes a responsive act, influenced by psychic residue, emotional extremes, and the dominant will present upon the world. Plant life, where it can still be described as such, often displays aggressive adaptation. Root systems may spread with unnatural speed, penetrating stone, metal, and even organic tissue. Surfaces that resemble forests may consist of towering growths that bleed when cut, exude fumes that induce hallucination, or react to proximity with contraction or expansion. Some growths produce structures similar to fruit, though these are not always consumable in any conventional sense. Consumption may result in mutation, sensory distortion, or heightened aggression. In certain recorded cases, flora has demonstrated limited motility, shifting position over time or reacting to environmental stimuli in a manner closer to predatory behaviour than passive growth. There are also regions where vegetation appears stable at first observation, maintaining the outward form of trees, grasses, or fungal networks. Extended exposure, however, reveals inconsistencies. Leaves may change colour without seasonal cause. Growth rings may not correspond to measurable time. Entire groves may appear in one location, only to be absent on return. In some instances, the vegetation itself is not truly alive in the biological sense, but is instead a projection or manifestation of warp influence given physical shape. These formations can dissolve under certain conditions, or transform rapidly when the governing psychic environment shifts. Faunal life follows similar deviations. Creatures found on Daemon Worlds range from corrupted remnants of native species to entirely new entities formed through warp exposure. Formerly recognizable animals may retain basic anatomical features, but exhibit exaggerated size, additional limbs, altered sensory organs, or complete behavioral reversal. Herbivorous species may become aggressive. Predatory species may hunt without need for sustenance, driven by instinctive compulsion rather than biological requirement. There are also creatures that cannot be traced to any original lineage. These entities often appear as composite forms, combining traits that do not align with known evolutionary pathways. Their physiology may not support conventional biological processes, yet they persist. Some bleed substances that evaporate before contact with the ground. Others exhibit internal structures that shift when observed. Movement patterns may ignore physical limitations, with some entities capable of traversing terrain in ways that contradict gravity or inertia. Among these are warp-born predators that occupy ecological niches created by constant conflict. They may feed on fear responses, psychic discharge, or the aftermath of ritual activity. Such creatures often emerge in areas of high emotional intensity, including battlefields, sacrificial grounds, or locations of prolonged suffering. Their presence reinforces the instability of the environment, creating feedback loops where violence and fear sustain further manifestations. It is also common for demonic entities themselves to function as apex predators within these ecosystems. Unlike native or corrupted fauna, demons are not bound to the same biological constraints. Their interaction with the environment can reshape local conditions, causing lesser life forms to adapt around them or be eradicated entirely. In regions under the influence of a specific chaos power, fauna may reflect the attributes associated with that patron. This produces ecosystems that are not merely hostile but thematically aligned with the nature of the dominant force. Geography on these worlds presents a fundamental departure from planetary norms. While some retain a recognizable planetary shape when viewed from orbit, surface mapping is rarely reliable. Terrain may not correspond to gravitational expectations. Elevation can shift without tectonic cause. Landmasses may expand, contract, or relocate over time. In extreme cases, the concept of distance becomes inconsistent, with travel between two fixed points yielding variable results depending on timing, route, or local conditions. Mountain ranges have been recorded that extend beyond what planetary mass should allow, rising into atmospheric layers without structural collapse. Valleys may descend into depths that defy geological explanation, sometimes leading to regions where the distinction between surface and subsurface ceases to be meaningful. Plains may stretch outward in apparent continuity, yet return travelers to their origin point without completing a circuit. Bodies of liquid, where present, are equally unreliable. Oceans may consist of substances that resemble water, but possess entirely different properties. Their surface may support weight in some areas and not in others. Depth may fluctuate without visible disturbance. Some recorded seas exhibit tidal behavior that does not correspond to orbital mechanics, instead rising and falling in response to events occurring on the surface or within the warp. Rivers may flow in multiple directions simultaneously, or reverse course without changing gradient. There are also regions where geography appears to be intentionally structured. These areas often correspond to zones of control exerted by powerful entities. Fortified landscapes, ritual pathways, and symbolic terrain features may be imposed upon the natural environment, creating patterns that serve strategic or devotional purposes. In such cases, geography becomes an extension of authority rather than a neutral feature. Meteorological conditions on Daemon Worlds are among the least stable aspects of their environment. Weather patterns do not follow predictable cycles tied to atmospheric physics. Instead, they may be influenced by ongoing events, concentrations of psychic energy, or the direct will of ruling entities. Storm systems can form and dissipate rapidly, sometimes localized to a single area, while adjacent regions remain unaffected. Precipitation varies widely in composition. Rain may consist of substances that corrode armor, induce hallucinations, or trigger biological reactions upon contact. In colder regions, snowfall may accumulate without corresponding temperature drop, or melt in patterns that defy thermal logic. There are documented instances of ash falling from clear skies, or of particulate matter descending in forms that resemble organic tissue rather than mineral content. Wind patterns are similarly inconsistent. Gusts may occur without pressure gradients, or persist in a single direction regardless of terrain. In some regions, air movement carries auditory phenomena, including indistinct voices or repetitive sounds that have no identifiable source. These effects contribute to the disorientation experienced by personnel operating within such environments. Temperature ranges can shift abruptly, not only across regions but within localized areas. A single structure may contain zones of extreme heat adjacent to areas of freezing conditions, without transitional gradients. Such variations are not always hazardous in the immediate sense, but they contribute to long-term degradation of equipment and physical resilience. Atmospheric composition may also vary over time. Readings taken at one moment may not match those taken shortly thereafter, even without observable environmental change. This variability complicates the use of protective equipment and limits the reliability of standard filtration systems. In some cases, breathable air is present only intermittently, requiring constant adjustment by those attempting to operate on the surface. Structures found on Daemon Worlds reflect the same principles observed in their natural environments. Conventional architecture, if it remains, is typically altered beyond its original function. Cities that once served as administrative or industrial centres may be reshaped into ritual complexes, defensive strongholds, or symbolic representations of chaos patronage. Structural integrity is not always governed by material strength. Buildings may remain standing despite visible collapse, or appear intact while failing under minimal stress. New construction is often carried out using methods that combine physical labour with ritual activity. Materials may include conventional substances such as stone and metal, but are frequently supplemented or replaced by organic matter, mutated growths, or unknown composites. The resulting structures can exhibit properties that are not reproducible under standard engineering principles. Interior spaces within such structures are rarely stable. Layouts may change over time, with corridors extending, contracting, or reconfiguring without external alteration. Rooms may serve different functions depending on when they are entered, or may not exist at all on subsequent visits. In extreme cases, internal volume exceeds external dimensions, creating spaces that cannot be reconciled with the structure's outer form. Fortifications are a common feature, particularly on worlds serving as bases for Traitor Legions or organised warbands. These may include massive walls, bastions, and weapon emplacements, designed for both defence and projection of power. However, their effectiveness is not solely derived from physical design. Many are integrated with warp-based enhancements, allowing them to resist assault in ways that do not rely on material durability alone. There are also structures dedicated entirely to ritual function. These may take the form of altars, arenas, or sacrificial platforms, often positioned at sites of previous significance. Their design prioritizes symbolic alignment over practical use, yet they play a critical role in maintaining the connection between the world and the warp. Activity within these sites can influence broader environmental conditions, reinforcing the link between local events and planetary behaviour. Transport infrastructure, where present, is similarly affected. Roads may exist but not lead to consistent destinations. Landing zones may shift or become unusable without warning. In some cases, movement between structures relies on pathways that are not physically present at all times, requiring specific conditions or knowledge to access. Despite these irregularities, patterns can be identified. Areas under strong centralized control tend to exhibit more consistent structure, though still far removed from standard planetary environments. Regions of contested influence display greater instability, with rapid changes in terrain, weather, and structural integrity. Unclaimed zones often present the highest level of unpredictability, as they are subject to overlapping influences without a dominant force to impose order. Taken together, the flora, fauna, geography, meteorology, and structures of Daemon Worlds form a unified system. Each element reinforces the others, creating environments that are not only hostile but self-sustaining in their instability. Biological life adapts to or is consumed by the conditions imposed upon it. Terrain shifts in response to forces that have no equivalent in real space. Weather acts as an extension of conflict and emotion. Structures embody both utility and symbolism, serving as focal points for control and transformation. This integration is what distinguishes Daemon Worlds from other forms of corrupted or hostile planets. The environment is not merely dangerous, it is actively aligned with the principles that define it. Survival within such a system requires more than physical endurance. It requires constant adaptation to conditions that cannot be predicted using conventional models. By the stage at which these features are fully developed, the world has completed its transition. What remains is not a planet struggling under corruption, but a stable expression of it. Every surface, every organism, every structure participates in maintaining that state. Any attempt to impose external order must contend not only with defenders, but with the environment itself, which no longer recognizes the authority of natural law. By the stage at which a demon world is fully established, its existence is no longer incidental. It serves defined functions within the broader structure of chaos-held space, even if those functions do not follow conventional strategic logic. These worlds are not merely the result of corruption. They are utilized, maintained, and contested because they provide advantages that cannot be replicated elsewhere. One of the most consistent uses is as a stronghold for Traitor Legions and Chaos warbands. Within real space, such forces must constantly account for supply limitations, attrition, and the resistance of the material universe itself. On a demon world, these constraints are reduced or altered. The environment supports their presence rather than opposing it. Warbands can regroup, rebuild, and expand without immediate pressure from Imperial retaliation, especially when the world is located deep within regions already saturated by warp influence. Fortresses established in these locations often become semi-permanent centers of power, anchoring fleets, staging assaults, and maintaining command structures that would be difficult to sustain in unstable or contested real space. These worlds also function as recruitment grounds. Mortal populations living under chaos rule provide a continuous source of fighters, laborers, and sacrificial assets. Unlike conventional recruitment systems which rely on selection, training, and logistical integration, demon worlds produce individuals already adapted to violence and instability. From early development, inhabitants are exposed to conditions that prioritize survival through aggression, obedience, or cunning. This produces a steady influx of individuals capable of serving in various roles, from frontline combatants to support personnel within larger war efforts. In addition to recruitment, these populations sustain ritual economies. Sacrifice, devotion, and the generation of psychic energy are central to maintaining the link between the world and the warp. Entire settlements may be organized around cycles of offering, conflict, and renewal, ensuring that the conditions required for continued corruption remain active. This creates a feedback system in which the world reinforces its own state. The more it is used, the more it stabilizes as a demon world. Another significant use is as a staging ground for incursions into real space. Forces based on such worlds can launch raids, invasions, or exploratory missions without the limitations faced by fleets operating from less stable regions. Warp travel originating from a demon world may benefit from reduced resistance, allowing for more direct or unpredictable routes. This makes such worlds valuable not only for their internal resources but for their position within the broader network of chaos-controlled space. Some demon worlds serve as domains for individual Daemon Princes or other powerful entities. In these cases, the world itself becomes an extension of the ruler's identity and authority. It functions as both a seat of power and a demonstration of favor granted by the Chaos Gods. Control over such a world provides not only strategic advantage but symbolic weight, reinforcing the status of the entity within the hierarchy of chaos. There are also instances where demon worlds act as repositories. Artifacts, relics, and knowledge considered dangerous or sacred may be stored within these environments, protected not only by physical defenses but by the inherent hostility of the world itself. Retrieval of such items is extremely difficult, requiring navigation through conditions that resist external interference. In certain cases, demon worlds are used as proving grounds. Individuals seeking advancement within chaos-aligned structures may be sent to these worlds to survive, conquer, or demonstrate capability. Success in such environments carries significant weight, as it proves not only martial ability, but adaptability to conditions shaped by the warp. The use of demon worlds is not limited to organized structures. Some exist as autonomous regions of conflict, where multiple factions compete without centralized control. These worlds still serve a function, acting as zones of continuous warfare that generate the conditions favored by chaos. Even without a singular authority, they contribute to the broader ecosystem by sustaining conflict and feeding the energies that define them. Key events in the history of Daemon Worlds are often tied to moments of transition. The initial corruption of a world is one such event. This may occur gradually through prolonged exposure to warp influence, or suddenly through catastrophic breaches between realspace and the immaterium. In both cases, the event marks the point at which the world ceases to operate under conventional laws and begins its transformation. Another recurring event is the consolidation of control. Following the initial corruption, different factions may attempt to dominate the world. These conflicts can be prolonged, involving both mortal and demonic forces. The outcome determines the long-term character of the world, as the victor imposes its influence on the environment, population, and structure. There are also recorded instances of external intervention. Imperial forces, Xenos entities, or rival Chaos factions may attempt to reclaim, destroy, or exploit a Daemon world. Such efforts are rarely successful in achieving complete objectives. Even when significant damage is inflicted, the underlying conditions that sustain the world often persist. Partial victories may result in temporary disruption, but long-term change is uncommon. In some cases, Daemon worlds have been the sites of major conflicts that extend beyond their immediate environment. Battles fought on or around these worlds can influence wider campaigns, either by drawing in large numbers of forces or by serving as strategic objectives. Control of a Daemon world may provide access to routes, resources, or positions that affect broader operations. There are also events tied to the internal dynamics of these worlds. Shifts in the balance of power, emergence of new rulers, or changes in the dominant Chaos influence can alter the world's behavior. These changes may be gradual or sudden, reflecting the unpredictable nature of the warp. Such events are often recorded through their effects rather than their causes, as direct observation is limited. Despite their instability, Daemon worlds exhibit a form of long-term continuity. Once fully established, they rarely revert to their original state. The transformation is effectively permanent, as the conditions required to sustain it are self-reinforcing. This permanence is one of the defining characteristics of the category. A world that has become a Daemon world does not simply recover, it becomes part of a different system entirely. In evaluating these worlds as locations, it is necessary to abandon conventional criteria. They cannot be assessed solely by size, population, or resource output. Their value lies in their function within the structure of Chaos and their impact on surrounding regions. A Daemon world may have limited material resources yet hold significant strategic importance due to its position, its ruler, or its role in sustaining warp activity. From an imperial perspective, these worlds represent ongoing threats. Their existence challenges the stability of nearby systems, providing bases for hostile forces and sources of corruption. Containment strategies focus on isolation, surveillance, and, where possible, destruction. However, the effectiveness of these strategies is limited by the nature of the worlds themselves. From the perspective of Chaos, Daemon worlds are assets. They are manifestations of power, control, and transformation. They demonstrate the ability of the warp to reshape reality and provide environments in which that reshaping can be sustained. Their continued existence reinforces the influence of Chaos across the galaxy. As planetary entities, Daemon worlds occupy a distinct classification. They are not transitional states but end conditions. Their geography, biology, and atmosphere are not anomalies within a larger system. They are the system. Every aspect of the world contributes to maintaining its nature, from the smallest organism to the largest structure. In conclusion, a Daemon world is defined not only by what it has become, but by how it is used and how it persists. It is a location where the boundaries between material and immaterial have been permanently altered. It functions as a stronghold, a resource, a weapon, and a symbol. Its inhabitants, environment, and structures are integrated into a single system that supports and perpetuates its state. Understanding such a world requires recognition that it cannot be approached as a conventional planet. It must be viewed as an active participant in the forces that created it. Its use cases reflect this, extending beyond simple occupation or exploitation. Its key events mark stages in a transformation that does not reverse. Its conclusion as a planetary entity is not one of stability in the traditional sense, but of equilibrium within chaos. This equilibrium is not peaceful or static. It is dynamic, sustained through conflict, mutation, and constant interaction with the warp. It represents a final stage in planetary corruption, where the original identity of the world is no longer recoverable. What remains is a fully realized demon world, operating according to principles that place it outside the framework of natural law and within the domain of chaos. Initial administratum entries concerning demon worlds rarely begin with direct classification. Instead, they appear as irregularities within otherwise routine data streams. Shipping lanes deviate without recorded obstruction. Astropathic messages arrive out of sequence or with partial duplication. Census projections for frontier systems begin to show abrupt decline without corresponding casualty reports. These anomalies, when isolated, are often attributed to clerical error, navigational drift, or localized unrest. It is only when such discrepancies accumulate across multiple departments that a pattern becomes visible, prompting further investigation. Upon formal recognition, the administratum reframes the issue as a systemic failure point rather than a localized incident. Worlds identified as demon worlds are removed from standard logistical frameworks. Trade routes are rerouted, supply chains are recalculated, and any existing tithe obligations are suspended or marked as unrecoverable. This reclassification is not immediate. It follows a period of attempted reconciliation, during which efforts are made to restore communication or verify the status of the affected world. These efforts frequently result in additional losses, reinforcing the need for isolation. From an observational standpoint, administratum records emphasize the breakdown of predictability. Data collected from previous surveys becomes unreliable. Orbital charts lose accuracy over time. Estimated population counts cannot be maintained, as inhabitants either perish, mutate, or become untraceable within altered environments. Even when remote observation is possible, the information gathered often contradicts earlier records. This inconsistency forces a shift in methodology. Rather than relying on static data, administratum analysts begin to track trends, focusing on patterns of change rather than fixed values. Mechanicus observations approach the same subject from a different angle. Where the administratum seeks to stabilize information, the Mechanicus seeks to understand deviation. Initial surveys conducted by Mechanicus vessels prioritize measurement of environmental variables. Atmospheric composition, gravitational consistency, electromagnetic activity, and radiation levels are recorded in rapid succession. These readings, however, rarely align with established models. Instruments calibrated for real space conditions return fluctuating results, even when observing the same location over short intervals. This has led to the development of adaptive measurement protocols. Instead of treating inconsistent readings as errors, Mechanicus adepts record them as valid data points, mapping variability itself as a defining characteristic. Over time, this approach has revealed that demon worlds do not operate without rules. Rather, they operate under a shifting framework influenced by factors not present in conventional physics. These factors include localized warp saturation, presence of demonic entities, and concentration of psychic activity. One of the most consistent observations across Mechanicus reports is the correlation between environmental instability and areas of concentrated activity. Regions with high levels of ritual practice, combat, or demonic manifestation tend to exhibit the greatest deviation from physical norms. Terrain in these areas may shift more rapidly, atmospheric conditions may become more volatile, and structural integrity may degrade or reinforce unpredictably. Conversely, regions with lower levels of activity may display temporary stability, allowing for limited observation or even short-term occupation. Strategically, this variability presents both challenges and opportunities. From an administratum perspective, demon worlds are categorized as non-compliant zones with high risk of contamination. Direct engagement is discouraged unless supported by overwhelming force or specific objectives deemed critical. The the cost of intervention is consistently high, with limited guarantee of success. As a result, most identified Daemon Worlds are placed under quarantine protocols. Surrounding systems are monitored for signs of spread, and travel restrictions are enforced to prevent unauthorized contact. Mechanicus' strategy, while aligned with overall Imperial doctrine, includes a parallel interest in controlled study. The anomalous properties of Daemon Worlds present opportunities to observe interactions between real space and the warp under sustained conditions. Such observations are considered valuable for advancing understanding of both fields, particularly in areas related to energy transfer, material resilience, and the limits of physical law. However, these studies are conducted under strict containment measures, often involving automated probes, remote observation platforms, or heavily shielded expeditionary teams. One key strategic finding is the identification of anchor points. These are locations within a Daemon world where the influence of the warp appears to be concentrated or stabilized. Anchor points may take the form of ritual sites, fortresses, or natural features that have been altered to serve as focal points for energy distribution. Control over these locations is often contested, as they provide a degree of influence over the surrounding environment. Mechanicus reports suggest that disruption of such points can lead to temporary destabilization, though the long-term effects remain uncertain. Administratum records complement this finding by noting patterns of conflict centered around these locations. Warbands and demonic forces frequently engage in prolonged engagements over specific sites, indicating their importance within the local hierarchy. These conflicts are not always visible from orbit, but their effects can be inferred through changes in environmental behavior and fluctuations in detected activity levels. Another significant observation is the persistence of localized order within broader chaos. While Daemon worlds are characterized by instability, certain regions maintain consistent structure over extended periods. These areas are typically under the control of dominant entities, such as Daemon Princes or established warbands. Within these zones, environmental conditions, population behavior, and structural layout exhibit a degree of predictability. This allows for more reliable planning by those in control, as well as more accurate observation by external forces. From a strategic standpoint, these zones represent both targets and threats. Their relative stability makes them suitable for staging operations, but also means they are more heavily defended. Administratum analyses often prioritize these areas when assessing potential intervention scenarios, as their disruption could have wider effects on the world's overall function. Mechanicus' interest in these zones is similarly high, as they provide opportunities to study sustained warp integration under controlled conditions. Logistical considerations also play a significant role in strategic evaluation. Daemon worlds do not support conventional supply lines. Resources must be sourced locally or transported through unstable routes. This limits the scale and duration of any external operation. Administratum projections consistently highlight the difficulty of maintaining a sustained presence, noting that even well-equipped forces experience rapid degradation in both material and personnel effectiveness. Mechanicus' findings reinforce this assessment by documenting the impact of environmental factors on equipment. Mechanical systems may fail without clear cause, energy outputs may fluctuate, and protective measures may degrade over time. These effects are not uniform, making it difficult to implement standardized solutions. Instead, adaptation and redundancy become essential components of any operational plan. Despite these challenges, Daemon worlds are not dismissed as strategically irrelevant. Their role within chaos-controlled space ensures that they remain active elements in broader conflicts. Administratum records frequently link increased activity on such worlds to subsequent incursions into Imperial territory. Monitoring these worlds therefore provides early indicators of potential threats, allowing for preemptive adjustments to defensive postures. Mechanicus observations add another layer to this analysis by tracking changes in warp activity associated with these worlds. Fluctuations in energy levels, emergence of new anomalies, and shifts in environmental behavior can signal changes in the underlying structure of the world. These signals, when interpreted correctly, offer insight into developments that may not yet be visible through conventional means. In summary, the combined impressions and observations of the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus present Daemon Worlds as dynamic systems defined by instability, influence, and strategic significance. They are not merely corrupted environments, but active nodes within a larger network shaped by the warp. Their behavior cannot be fully predicted, but it can be studied through patterns, correlations, and sustained observation. Strategically, they represent both a persistent threat and a source of valuable data. Their existence challenges conventional models of planetary function, requiring new approaches to classification, analysis, and response. While direct control remains unlikely in most cases, understanding their behavior provides critical advantages in anticipating and countering the forces that emerge from them. These findings form the foundation for continued study, guiding both defensive measures and controlled exploration. As long as Daemon Worlds persist, they will remain central to any comprehensive understanding of chaos influence within the galaxy. Explorative entries compiled by the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus begin with a shared limitation. There is no stable reference frame that can be relied upon when approaching a Daemon world. Standard cartographic methods depend on fixed coordinates, consistent orbital mechanics, and predictable surface geometry. None of these remain reliable once a world has undergone full warp saturation. As a result, exploration does not proceed through conventional mapping, but through layered approximation, cross-referenced observation, and repeated verification over time. Administratum survey directives classify these worlds as non-linear environments. Coordinates assigned to specific regions are marked with temporal qualifiers, indicating that their accuracy is limited to the moment of recording. A location identified at one interval may not occupy the same position at another, even if no observable movement has occurred. This has led to the use of relative positioning systems, where locations are described in relation to persistent phenomena rather than fixed spatial points. Examples include proximity to a recurring storm formation, alignment with a visible celestial distortion, or distance from a known anchor structure. Mechanicus expeditions refine this method through the use of multi-spectrum scanning and iterative triangulation. Instead of relying on a single coordinate set, multiple readings are taken across different intervals and conditions. These readings are then compared to identify patterns of recurrence. While absolute stability is not achieved, zones of relative consistency can be established. These zones form the basis for limited operational planning, allowing for short-duration deployments and targeted exploration. One of the most significant findings from these efforts is the identification of geographic layering. On many Daemon worlds, surface geography exists in multiple overlapping states. A single region may present one configuration under certain conditions and a completely different one under others. These changes are not random. They often correlate with shifts in warp activity, presence of dominant entities, or cycles of ritual and conflict. Mechanicus analysis suggests that these layers are not separate locations, but concurrent expressions of the same space, each influenced by different variables. Administratum records incorporate this concept by assigning multiple designations to the same region. A location may be catalogued under several identifiers, each corresponding to a different observed state. This approach allows for more accurate tracking of events, as reports can be matched to the specific conditions under which they occurred. It also highlights the difficulty of maintaining continuity in data, as overlapping records must be reconciled without assuming a single consistent reality. Geographic coordinates, in this context, become probabilistic rather than definitive. A recorded coordinate does not guarantee the presence of a specific feature, but indicates a likelihood based on prior observation. This requires a shift in operational thinking. Navigation is no longer a matter of reaching a fixed point, but of entering a zone where a desired condition may manifest. Success depends on timing, environmental alignment, and in some cases the influence of external factors such as warp tides or localized psychic activity. Despite these limitations, certain features exhibit a degree of persistence that allows for more reliable identification. These include large-scale structures, significant topographical formations and areas of concentrated activity. Such features are often associated with anchor points, where the influence of the warp is stabilized by continuous input from ritual, presence, or structural reinforcement. These locations serve as reference markers within an otherwise fluid environment, providing a framework for both exploration and strategic planning. Mechanicus reports place particular emphasis on these anchor points due to their potential applications. By studying the conditions that allow for relative stability, adepts aim to understand how warp influence can be contained, redirected, or harnessed. Experiments conducted in proximity to these sites have yielded data on energy fluctuations, material resilience, and the interaction between physical and immaterial forces. While practical application remains limited, the insights gained are considered valuable for broader research into warp mechanics. Administratum analysis focuses on the strategic implications of these findings. Anchor points are identified as critical assets within the structure of a demon world. Control over such locations provides influence over surrounding regions, affecting both environmental behavior and population dynamics. This makes them primary objectives in any planned intervention, as their disruption could lead to localized destabilization. However, the same factors that make them valuable also make them heavily contested, increasing the risk associated with any operation targeting them. Resource evaluation on Daemon Worlds presents a complex challenge. Traditional resource categories, such as mineral deposits, agricultural potential, or industrial capacity, are difficult to assess due to environmental instability. Materials present on the surface may not retain consistent properties, and extraction processes may trigger unpredictable reactions. Despite this, certain resources have been identified as having strategic value. One such resource is the presence of warp-reactive materials. These substances, often formed through prolonged exposure to warp energies, exhibit properties not found in conventional matter. They may enhance or disrupt psychic activity, alter energy transmission, or resist degradation under extreme conditions. Mechanicus' interest in these materials is significant, as they offer potential applications in both defensive and offensive technologies. However, their extraction and handling require specialized protocols, as improper interaction can lead to contamination or uncontrolled reactions. Another resource category involves biological entities. Flora and fauna adapted to demon world conditions possess unique characteristics that may be of interest for study or utilization. Certain organisms produce compounds with unusual effects, while others demonstrate resilience to environmental extremes. Mechanicus research teams have conducted limited collection efforts, though the risks associated with such operations restrict their scale. Administratum records note that these biological resources are not considered essential, but may provide secondary benefits if safely acquired. Human and post-human populations also represent a form of resource, particularly in the context of intelligence gathering and labor potential. Survivors or inhabitants captured from demon worlds can provide insight into local conditions, power structures, and environmental patterns. However, their reliability is consistently questioned due to potential corruption. As a result, their use is limited to controlled interrogation and observation, with strict containment measures in place. Strategic value extends beyond tangible resources. Demon worlds occupy positions within warp space that can influence navigation and travel. Their presence affects local warp currents, creating routes that may be exploited by those familiar with their behavior. This makes them valuable as navigational reference points for chaos-aligned forces, allowing for more efficient movement between regions. Conversely, their influence can disrupt Imperial navigation, increasing the difficulty of maintaining secure travel routes in affected areas. Administratum projections highlight the importance of monitoring these effects. Changes in warp behavior around a demon world can indicate shifts in its internal structure or the emergence of new dominant forces. Such changes may precede increased activity, including raids or invasions. Early detection allows for adjustments in defensive positioning, reducing the risk of unanticipated incursions. Mechanicus observations complement this by tracking energy signatures and anomaly patterns. By analyzing fluctuations over time, adepts can identify trends that suggest underlying changes. These trends, while not always precise, provide a basis for predictive modelling. Such models are not definitive, but offer a degree of foresight in an environment where certainty is unattainable. Exploration of Daemon Worlds remains limited in scope due to the inherent risks involved. Most data is gathered through remote observation, short-duration missions, or analysis of recovered materials. Extended expeditions are rare and often result in significant losses. Despite this, the value of the information obtained ensures that exploration continues, albeit under strict constraints. The combined findings of the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus present a picture of Daemon Worlds as environments that resist conventional understanding, yet exhibit identifiable patterns when studied over time. Geographic coordinates become fluid constructs, defined by probability and context rather than fixed position. Resources exist but require redefinition and careful handling. Strategic value is derived not only from what these worlds contain, but from how they influence the surrounding space. In operational terms, these worlds are approached as dynamic systems. Success in any engagement depends on the ability to adapt to changing conditions, interpret incomplete data, and exploit moments of relative stability. While full control remains unlikely, targeted actions can yield measurable results, particularly when focused on key locations or resources. These explorative findings reinforce the need for continued study. As long as Daemon Worlds persist, they will shape the strategic landscape in ways that cannot be ignored. Understanding their geography, even in its fluid state, and identifying the value within their instability remains essential for any force seeking to operate in proximity to chaos-controlled space. Scientific inquiry conducted upon Daemon Worlds is constrained by risk, yet pursued due to the potential value of the knowledge obtained. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in particular, approaches these environments not as aberrations to be dismissed, but as extreme case studies in the interaction between real space and the warp. Within controlled parameters, even limited observation has yielded insights that cannot be replicated under conventional conditions. One of the primary areas of interest lies in the behavior of matter under sustained warp influence. Materials recovered from these worlds often exhibit altered structural properties. Some demonstrate resilience beyond expected tolerances, maintaining integrity under stress that would fracture standard alloys. Others display instability, degrading rapidly or changing composition without external cause. By cataloguing these variations, Mechanicus adepts have begun to identify patterns linking material behavior to levels of warp saturation. These findings contribute to ongoing efforts to develop materials capable of withstanding hostile environments, including those encountered in warp travel or in proximity to psychic phenomena. Energy interaction is another significant field of study. Daemon Worlds provide environments where the boundaries between physical and immaterial energy are reduced. Measurements taken in such regions indicate that energy transfer can occur across these boundaries under specific conditions. While the mechanisms remain poorly understood, the implications are considerable. Improved understanding of these interactions could enhance the efficiency of existing technologies, particularly those reliant on warp-based systems. However, practical application remains limited, as attempts to replicate these conditions outside of Daemon Worlds have not produced consistent results. Biological research also benefits from exposure to these environments, though it carries substantial risk. Organisms native to or adapted for Daemon Worlds demonstrate capabilities not observed in standard ecosystems. These include resistance to extreme conditions, rapid adaptation, and interaction with psychic stimuli. Mechanicus biologists have documented instances where exposure to certain organisms results in measurable changes in human physiology, though such effects are rarely stable or beneficial in the long term. Despite this, the study of these organisms contributes to a broader understanding of biological limits and potential adaptations. From an administratum perspective, the value of such research is evaluated in terms of its applicability to Imperial operations. While direct benefits are often limited, the data obtained can inform strategies for containment, defense, and engagement. Understanding how materials degrade, how environments shift, and how populations adapt provides a foundation for more effective response planning. Even when immediate application is not possible, the accumulation of knowledge is considered a strategic asset. These benefits, however, are counterbalanced by the extensive hazards associated with Daemon Worlds. Environmental risks begin with the instability of the terrain itself. Surfaces may shift without warning, structures may collapse or reconfigure, and areas deemed stable may become hazardous within moments. This unpredictability complicates all forms of movement and increases the likelihood of equipment failure or personnel loss. Atmospheric conditions present additional challenges. Variability in composition can render protective systems ineffective, exposing personnel to toxins, corrosive substances, or conditions that impair cognitive function. Even when breathable air is present, it may carry particulate matter or energies that produce delayed effects, including hallucination, disorientation, or physiological degradation. Continuous monitoring is required, yet the reliability of monitoring equipment is itself compromised by environmental factors. Meteorological hazards further contribute to operational difficulty. Storm systems may arise without warning, bringing with them conditions that exceed the tolerance of standard protective gear. Precipitation can cause damage upon contact, while wind patterns may interfere with communication and navigation. Temperature fluctuations, often extreme and localized, place additional strain on both personnel and equipment. Biological hazards are pervasive. Flora and fauna, as previously documented, are not passive elements of the environment. Many possess traits that make them actively dangerous, including aggressive behavior, toxic emissions, or the ability to alter their surroundings. Contact with such organisms can result in immediate harm or delayed effects that compromise mission integrity. Even non-hostile organisms may carry risks due to their altered nature. Beyond these physical hazards lies the influence of the warp itself. Exposure to a Daemon world subjects personnel to continuous psychic pressure. This can manifest as auditory or visual distortions, intrusive thoughts, or emotional instability. Over time, such exposure increases the risk of corruption as individuals become more susceptible to external influence. Protective measures, including mental conditioning and technological shielding, provide limited mitigation but do not eliminate the risk. Equipment degradation is another consistent hazard. Mechanical systems may fail without identifiable cause, energy outputs may fluctuate, and structural components may weaken unpredictably. Redundancy and adaptability are essential, yet even well-prepared teams experience gradual loss of operational capability. This degradation extends to data integrity, as recorded information may become corrupted or inconsistent, complicating analysis and decision-making. Administratum records emphasize the cumulative effect of these hazards. Individual risks may be manageable in isolation, but their combination creates an environment where sustained operation becomes increasingly difficult. This leads to a strategic preference for short-duration missions, focused objectives, and rapid withdrawal. Extended presence is rarely justified unless the potential gain significantly outweighs the projected loss. Mechanicus doctrine aligns with this assessment, incorporating hazard mitigation into all stages of exploration. Remote observation is prioritized, with direct engagement reserved for situations where data cannot be obtained otherwise. When physical presence is required, teams are equipped with specialized gear and supported by contingency protocols designed to limit exposure and facilitate extraction. Despite these precautions, losses remain common. Personnel may be lost to environmental factors, biological threats, or corruption. Equipment may be rendered unusable, and data may be compromised. These outcomes are accepted as inherent to the nature of the subject. The continuation of research reflects a calculated decision that the potential benefits justify the risks involved. In conclusion, the study of Daemon Worlds presents a balance between opportunity and danger. Scientific research conducted in these environments contributes to a deeper understanding of the interaction between real space and the warp, offering insights that cannot be obtained elsewhere. These insights have the potential to inform technological development, strategic planning, and defensive measures. At the same time, the hazards associated with these worlds are extensive and persistent. Environmental instability, atmospheric variability, biological threats, and psychic influence combine to create conditions that challenge all forms of operation. Effective engagement requires adaptation, resilience, and acceptance of uncertainty. From the combined perspective of the Adeptus Administratum and the Adeptus Mechanicus, Daemon Worlds are neither purely threats nor purely sources of knowledge. They are both. Their existence necessitates caution, yet their study provides value that extends beyond their immediate context. As long as they persist, they will remain subjects of interest, requiring careful management and continued observation. This duality defines their role within imperial consideration. They are environments to be contained, studied, and, where possible, understood. Their hazards cannot be eliminated, and their benefits cannot be ignored. The balance between these factors shapes all interaction with them, guiding both policy and practice in the face of a phenomenon that exists beyond conventional limits. Inquisition records concerning Daemon Worlds begin from a position of suspicion rather than classification. Where the Adeptus Administratum identifies logistical anomalies and the Adeptus Mechanicus identifies environmental deviation, the Inquisition identifies intent. A world does not become what it is without cause, and in every case that cause is traced not only to corruption, but to agency. Initial impressions are therefore framed around patterns of influence, infiltration, and the presence of actors whose actions contributed to the world's transformation. Early observations often focus on the pre-collapse phase of such worlds. Archived interrogations and recovered data indicate that few Daemon Worlds emerge without prolonged preparation. Cult networks, ideological drift, unsanctioned psychic activity, and localized warp disturbances frequently precede the final transition. These indicators, when examined in isolation, may not trigger immediate response. However, when viewed collectively, they form a pattern of escalation that suggests deliberate cultivation rather than accidental collapse. In several recorded cases, the emergence of a Daemon World has been linked to coordinated activity across multiple sectors. Cults operating independently on separate worlds have demonstrated synchronized behavior, suggesting communication beyond conventional means. Ritual practices, when analysed, show structural similarities that cannot be attributed to coincidence. This has led to the conclusion that certain Daemon Worlds are not merely the result of local corruption, but a part of broader efforts to reshape regions of space through sustained warp influence. Observations conducted after a world's transition reveal additional layers of complexity. Unlike other forms of chaos-held territory, Daemon Worlds exhibit a degree of coherence that implies ongoing oversight. Environmental changes, population behavior, and structural development often align with identifiable patterns associated with specific chaos powers or entities. This alignment is not passive. It reflects continuous reinforcement, suggesting that these worlds are maintained through active intervention rather than left to develop independently. Inquisition analysts have noted that this maintenance may involve both mortal and demonic agents. Traitor Legions, warbands, and cult hierarchies operate within these worlds, enforcing order according to their allegiance. At the same time, demonic entities exert influence that extends beyond direct interaction. The combined effect is a system in which authority is distributed yet unified by shared purpose. This challenges the assumption that chaos operates purely through disorder, indicating instead that structured systems can exist within its domain. Conspiracy findings expand upon these observations by examining the implications of such coordination. One line of inquiry suggests that Daemon Worlds may serve as nodes within a larger network, each contributing to the expansion of warp influence. The positioning of these worlds, particularly within or near major warp disturbances, supports this theory. Their presence appears to stabilize certain routes while destabilizing others, creating patterns that could be exploited for strategic movement or expansion. Another area of concern involves the potential for intentional creation. While many Daemon Worlds arise from gradual corruption, there is evidence to suggest that some are engineered through deliberate action. rituals of sufficient scale conducted over extended periods may alter the fabric of a world in a controlled manner. Such operations would require significant coordination, resources and protection, implying the involvement of high-ranking entities or organized factions. If confirmed, this would indicate that the creation of Daemon Worlds can be pursued as a strategic objective rather than an incidental outcome. Inquisition records also address the role of knowledge in these processes. Information related to warp manipulation, ritual structure, and planetary corruption is not uniformly distributed. Certain groups appear to possess advanced understanding, allowing them to influence outcomes with greater precision. The dissemination of such knowledge, whether intentional or accidental, represents a significant threat. Efforts to contain or eliminate this information are ongoing, though complete suppression has not been achieved. Observations of inhabitants provide further insight into the internal dynamics of these worlds. Interrogations of recovered individuals, when possible, reveal a range of perspectives. Some describe their environment as oppressive and inescapable, while others express acceptance or even loyalty to the forces governing it. This variation suggests that control is maintained through a combination of coercion, adaptation, and ideological reinforcement. In some cases, populations are not merely surviving within these conditions, but actively participating in their continuation. Behavioral patterns among these populations indicate that exposure to prolonged warp influence alters perception of normality. Actions that would be considered extreme or irrational in other contexts become integrated into daily life. This normalization of instability complicates efforts to extract reliable testimony, as subjects may not recognize the significance of events that would be considered critical by external observers. Conspiracy findings also extend to the interaction between Daemon Worlds and Imperial systems. There are instances where proximity to such a world has resulted in increased cult activity, unexplained disappearances, or sudden shifts in local behavior. These effects are not always immediate, suggesting a gradual spread of influence. This has led to the hypothesis that Daemon Worlds function as sources of contamination, emitting influence that extends beyond their physical boundaries. The mechanism of this spread remains unclear. Some theories propose that psychic resonance carries the influence across space, affecting susceptible individuals. Others suggest that physical contact through trade, travel, or unauthorized exploration introduces elements of corruption into new environments. Regardless of the method, the observed result is consistent. Systems near Daemon Worlds exhibit higher rates of instability, requiring increased monitoring and intervention. Inquisition strategy reflects these findings through a focus on containment and early detection. Surveillance of regions surrounding known Daemon Worlds is intensified, with particular attention given to signs of emerging cult activity or warp anomalies. Interrogation protocols are adapted to account for the unique psychological effects experienced by individuals exposed to these environments. In extreme cases, entire populations may be subject to investigation or quarantine to prevent the spread of corruption. There is also recognition of the limitations inherent in these efforts. The scale of influence exerted by Daemon Worlds, combined with the difficulty of obtaining accurate information, restricts the effectiveness of standard measures. As a result, Inquisition operations often rely on targeted actions, focusing on specific threats rather than attempting comprehensive control. This approach prioritizes disruption of key actors, elimination of knowledge sources, and prevention of further expansion. A notable pattern in recorded cases is the recurrence of certain symbolic elements across different Daemon Worlds. Structures, rituals, and behavioral motifs appear with variations, suggesting a shared framework underlying their development. This has been interpreted as evidence of common origin or influence, potentially linked to the chaos gods themselves or to established doctrines propagated by their followers. The consistency of these elements supports the theory of coordinated activity, reinforcing the idea that Daemon Worlds are not isolated phenomena. In conclusion, the Inquisition perspective frames Daemon Worlds as products of deliberate action, sustained through ongoing influence and integrated into broader systems of chaos activity. Their impressions and observations emphasize agency, coordination, and the presence of underlying structures within apparent disorder. Conspiracy findings extend this analysis, identifying potential networks, methods of creation, and mechanisms of influence that challenge conventional understanding. These worlds are not viewed as static endpoints, but as active participants in a process of expansion. Their existence reflects both the capability and the intent of chaos-aligned forces to reshape reality on a planetary scale. Addressing this threat requires not only containment and response, but continuous investigation into the forces and actors responsible. The findings presented here form part of an ongoing effort to understand and counter these phenomena. As new information becomes available, interpretations may shift, but the core assessment remains consistent. Daemon Worlds represent a convergence of corruption, control, and purpose, requiring vigilance at all levels to mitigate their impact on the wider Imperium. Inquisition expeditions directed toward Daemon Worlds are not structured as conventional surveys. They are assembled with limited objectives, restricted duration, and layered oversight designed to contain both physical and informational contamination. The primary aim is not comprehensive understanding, but the extraction of specific insights that cannot be obtained through remote observation. Each deployment is treated as expendable in principle, with success defined by the value of recovered data rather than the survival of the team. Explorative findings from such missions indicate that entry into a Daemon world does not occur at a single threshold. Transition from real space to the surface is gradual, marked by progressive degradation of sensory reliability. Visual range may remain intact while depth perception becomes inconsistent. Auditory input may include delayed or anticipatory signals. Timekeeping devices begin to diverge, with internal chronometers desynchronizing from one another despite identical calibration. These effects intensify as distance from the point of entry increases, suggesting that proximity to stable boundaries offers limited protection. Initial landing zones are selected based on prior administratum and mechanicus data, favoring regions of relative consistency. Even so, stability is temporary. Terrain identified as secure may alter within a short interval, requiring continuous reassessment. Inquisition teams adapt by maintaining mobile positions, avoiding prolonged occupation of any single location unless mission parameters demand it. Static encampments are considered liabilities, as they become focal points for environmental response. Anomalies encountered during exploration are categorized according to their effect on perception, environment, and entity behavior. Perceptual anomalies are the most immediate. Personnel report visual distortions that cannot be reconciled with instrument readings. Objects may appear at incorrect distances or change form when observed from different angles. In some cases, individuals perceive entities or structures that are not detected by others, leading to conflicting accounts within the same team. Environmental anomalies present as alterations in terrain, atmosphere, and spatial continuity. Pathways may extend beyond expected limits, or terminate abruptly without corresponding obstacles. Structures may contain internal configurations that exceed their external dimensions. In several documented instances, teams have entered enclosed spaces and failed to locate an exit that had been used moments prior. These conditions complicate navigation and increase the likelihood of separation, which is considered a critical failure state. Entity anomalies involve both native and demonic life forms. Creatures encountered may not conform to consistent behavior patterns. An entity observed as passive at one moment may become aggressive without external trigger. Others may ignore the presence of personnel entirely, focusing instead on activities that appear unrelated to survival or interaction. Demonic manifestations add an additional layer of complexity, as their presence is often tied to specific conditions that may not be immediately apparent. They may appear in response to emotional states, environmental changes, or ritual activity, making their behavior difficult to predict. Documented encounters provide insight into how these anomalies interact with operational objectives. In one case, an Inquisition team established a perimeter around a structure identified as a potential anchor point. Initial observations indicated low activity, allowing for controlled entry. Within the structure, the team encountered a series of chambers arranged in a repeating pattern. Each chamber contained variations of the same configuration, with differences in scale, orientation, and content. Attempts to map the interior resulted in conflicting data, as recorded layouts did not match subsequent observations. The team withdrew after determining that continued exploration would not yield reliable information. Another encounter involved contact with a population of inhabitants displaying coordinated behavior. Unlike typical chaotic groups, this population operated under a defined hierarchy with clear roles and communication patterns. Initial interaction suggested the possibility of controlled interrogation. However, extended observation revealed that the population's behavior was synchronized with environmental changes. Movements, speech patterns, and activities aligned with fluctuations in local conditions, indicating external influence. The team concluded that direct engagement would compromise operational integrity and disengaged. There are also records of encounters with individuals who retain a degree of self-awareness despite prolonged exposure. These subjects often provide valuable information, though their reliability is uncertain. In one instance, a recovered individual described recurring shifts in the environment that corresponded to specific events, such as conflict or ritual activity. Cross-referencing this account with recorded data confirmed partial alignment, suggesting that local inhabitants may possess an intuitive understanding of environmental patterns. However, the subject's subsequent behavior became erratic, and containment protocols were enacted. Anomalies affecting time perception are among the most disruptive. Teams have reported discrepancies between subjective experience and recorded duration. Missions believed to have lasted hours have corresponded to days or weeks in external timekeeping. Conversely, extended operations have been recorded as brief intervals. These discrepancies complicate coordination with external support and increase the difficulty of maintaining operational schedules. In some cases, extraction points have become inaccessible due to temporal misalignment, resulting in the loss of personnel. Inquisition analysis of these findings emphasizes the interconnected nature of anomalies. Perceptual, environmental, and entity-related deviations do not occur independently. They form a network of effects that reinforce one another, creating conditions that resist systematic analysis. Attempts to isolate variables are often unsuccessful, as changes in one aspect of the environment influence others in unpredictable ways. Despite these challenges, patterns have been identified. Certain anomalies recur under similar conditions, allowing for limited prediction. For example, increased demonic activity often coincides with elevated emotional states among personnel or inhabitants. Environmental instability may follow concentrated ritual activity or large-scale conflict. Recognizing these patterns allows teams to anticipate potential hazards and adjust behavior accordingly. Operational doctrine incorporates these findings through strict procedural controls. Teams are trained to prioritize objective completion over exploration, minimizing exposure to unknown variables. Communication protocols emphasize redundancy, with multiple channels used to verify information. Psychological monitoring is continuous, with indicators established to detect early signs of corruption or instability. Withdrawal is authorized at the first indication that conditions have exceeded manageable thresholds. Documented encounters also highlight the limitations of these measures. Even with preparation and adaptation, the unpredictability of Daemon Worlds ensures that no operation is without risk. Losses are not uncommon, and successful missions often yield incomplete data. This has led to a strategic emphasis on incremental progress, where multiple limited operations contribute to a broader understanding over time. In conclusion, Inquisition explorative findings present Daemon Worlds as environments defined by layered anomalies and complex interactions. Exploration within these worlds is constrained by factors that challenge perception, disrupt navigation, and alter behavior. Documented encounters provide valuable insights, but also underscore the difficulty of obtaining reliable information. The anomalies observed are not isolated phenomena, but components of a system that resists conventional analysis. Understanding this system requires recognition of its interconnected nature and acceptance of its inherent unpredictability. Inquisition efforts continue to adapt, refining methods and protocols in response to new findings. These operations, though limited in scope, contribute to a growing body of knowledge that informs broader strategy. By documenting anomalies and encounters, the Inquisition seeks to identify patterns that can be used to mitigate risk and counter the influence of these worlds. While complete understanding remains unattainable, each finding adds to the framework through which Daemon Worlds are studied and addressed. Inquisition records concerning inhabitant interviews are compiled under strict containment protocols. Individuals recovered from Daemon Worlds are not treated as conventional witnesses. Their exposure to prolonged warp influence introduces variables that compromise memory integrity, perception, and intent. Each subject is therefore evaluated through layered interrogation, cross-referenced with prior reports, and monitored for signs of contamination. Information is extracted incrementally, with emphasis placed on consistency across multiple sessions rather than immediate coherence. Initial interviews often reveal fragmented accounts. Subjects describe environments that shift without warning, entities that appear and disappear, and events that do not follow a linear sequence. These descriptions, while difficult to verify individually, begin to form patterns when compared across multiple sources. Recurrent themes include the instability of distance, the alteration of time perception, and the presence of hierarchical structures governing both inhabitants and demonic entities. These consistencies provide a baseline for further analysis. Physical descriptions of inhabitants, when recorded, vary widely depending on duration of exposure and role within the local structure. Some individuals retain largely human characteristics, though often marked by signs of mutation such as altered skin tone, irregular growth patterns, or additional features that do not align with standard anatomy. Others display more extensive transformation, including significant changes in body structure, sensory organs, and overall physiology. These variations are not random. They often correspond to the individual's function within the environment, suggesting a relationship between role and physical adaptation. Subjects frequently report that status within Daemon World populations is determined by utility and alignment with dominant forces. Those who demonstrate strength, resilience, or usefulness in ritual or combat may achieve positions of authority. Others occupy subordinate roles, providing labor, serving as intermediaries, or acting as resources within sacrificial systems. This stratification is reinforced through both physical and psychological means, ensuring compliance and continuity. Interviews also indicate that perception of normality undergoes significant alteration. Behaviors that would be considered extreme or irrational in other contexts are described as routine. Acts of violence, mutation, and environmental instability are integrated into daily experience. Subjects often struggle to distinguish between events that are significant and those that are not, as their frame of reference has shifted to accommodate conditions that lack consistency. One of the most notable findings from these interviews is the presence of localized knowledge systems. Inhabitants develop methods for navigating their environment that are not based on fixed rules, but on recognition of patterns and cues. These may include changes in sound, shifts in light, or alterations in the behavior of nearby entities. Such knowledge is often transmitted through direct experience rather than formal instruction, making it difficult to document but valuable when identified. Collaborative findings emerge when Inquisition analysts compare interview data with observations from Administratum and Mechanicus sources. Points of convergence are given priority, as they indicate areas where subjective experience aligns with external measurement. For example, reports of environmental shifts corresponding to periods of heightened activity are supported by recorded fluctuations in energy signatures. Similarly, descriptions of hierarchical control structures are consistent with observed patterns of organized behavior in certain regions. Discrepancies are also examined, though they are not immediately dismissed. Variations in testimony may reflect differences in perspective, exposure, or environmental conditions rather than inaccuracy. By mapping these differences, analysts can identify zones of greater instability or areas where perception is more heavily influenced by external factors. This approach allows for a more nuanced understanding of the environment, recognizing that multiple interpretations may coexist. In some cases, collaborative analysis has revealed the presence of recurring entities or structures across different demon worlds. Subjects describe figures or formations that share common characteristics, despite originating from separate locations. These similarities suggest underlying patterns or influences that extend beyond individual worlds. While not conclusive, such findings support the theory of interconnected systems within chaos-controlled space. Interviews also provide insight into the mechanisms of control employed within these environments. Subjects frequently describe a combination of coercion, adaptation, and indoctrination. Authority is maintained through visible displays of power, reinforcement of belief systems, and manipulation of environmental conditions. In some instances, individuals report a sense of alignment or purpose derived from their role, indicating that control is not solely imposed, but internalized. The reliability of these accounts is subject to continuous evaluation. Subjects may provide accurate information in one context and unreliable data in another. This variability necessitates ongoing monitoring and reassessment. Information is rarely accepted without corroboration, and even confirmed data is treated with caution due to the potential for distortion. From a strategic perspective, these findings contribute to a broader understanding of how demon worlds sustain themselves. Inhabitants are not passive victims of their environment, but active participants in maintaining its structure. Their behaviors, beliefs, and adaptations reinforce the conditions that define the world, creating a self-sustaining system. Disrupting this system requires more than external force. It requires intervention at multiple levels, addressing both physical and psychological components. Inquisition doctrine incorporates these insights into operational planning. Interrogation protocols are designed to extract usable information while minimizing the risk of contamination. Collaborative analysis ensures that data is evaluated within a broader context, increasing its reliability. Strategic decisions are informed by an understanding of both environmental conditions and inhabitant behavior, allowing for more targeted interventions. Despite these efforts, limitations remain. The complexity of demon worlds, combined with the variability of individual experience, restricts the extent to which they can be fully understood. Each new report adds to the body of knowledge, but also introduces new variables that must be considered. This ongoing process reflects the dynamic nature of the subject, requiring continuous adaptation and reassessment. In conclusion, inhabitant interview reports and collaborative findings present a detailed, though incomplete, picture of life within demon worlds. They reveal patterns of adaptation, control, and perception that are essential to understanding how these environments function. While individual accounts may be unreliable in isolation, their collective analysis provides valuable insights. These findings reinforce the view that demon worlds are not merely locations of corruption, but integrated systems sustained by both environmental and human factors. Addressing the threat they pose requires a comprehensive approach, combining observation, analysis, and targeted action. The Inquisition continues to refine its methods, seeking to expand understanding while mitigating risk. The final assessment remains consistent. Demon worlds represent a convergence of influence, where physical reality and warp forces intersect to produce stable, yet unpredictable environments. Their inhabitants, shaped by these conditions, play a central role in maintaining this state. Understanding their experiences despite the challenges involved is essential to any effort aimed at countering the broader influence of chaos.